And welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. You can find more info and more podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's July 17th, and on this day in 1941, Joe Dimaggio went 0 for 3 with a walk, ending his hitting streak at 56. Playing the second game of a 3-game series in Cleveland on this day, Joe came to the plate 4 times, but he failed to get a hit. But it's not like he went quietly. In fact, if it had not been for some fantastic glove work from Cleveland third baseman Ken Keltner, the streak would have continued. In the first inning, Joe D smashed an Al Smith pitch down the third base line, but Keltner backhanded it, turned and fired a strike to first base to nip him. He drew a walk in the 4th, and then in the 7th, it was another hot shot to Keltner, who handled it again with ease and fired to first for the out. When Joe came to the plate in the 8th with the bases loaded, he figured this was his last opportunity to keep the streak alive. He hit a Jim Bagby offering back up the middle, but shortstop Lou Boudreau had Joe played perfectly. He scooped it, touched the bag for 1, and threw to first for the double play. The streak was over. Over the course of the 56 games, Dimaggio hit .408 with 15 home runs and 55 RBI, and he was indeed a tough out over that stretch, striking out just 5 times. The streak had come close to ending prematurely a few times. The closest was back on May 30th when he waited until the 9th inning to pick up a hit to keep the streak going. In another game against Chicago, a favorable ruling by the official scorer on what looked like it could have been called a booted ball by Luke Appling. It was called a hit instead, which added another game to the tally. On June 24th against the St. Louis Browns, Dimaggio was hitless in the bottom of the 7th. Browns manager Luke Sewell ordered his pitcher to walk Dimaggio, but he refused. Instead, he delivered a strike that Dimaggio smoked to left to extend the streak to 37 games. After the streak ended on this day, Dimaggio would start a 16-game hitting streak on his way to his second American League MVP of the 3 in his career. Interesting fact, his going hitless on this day cost him $10,000. The Heinz Company had a deal in place for Joe to endorse their Heinz 57 sauce if he had gotten the streak to 57. On this day in 1930, it was the first hat trick scored in World Cup history, and it was scored by an American. Just like I talked about a few days ago, this is the first ever World Cup hosted in Uruguay's capital of Montevideo. On this day, the U.S. contingent played Paraguay. American Bert Patenaude scored a goal in the 10th minute, his second in the 15th, and his final one in the 50th minute, leading the Americans to a 3-0 win. That victory propelled the U.S. into the knockout round. But Patenaude's feat received little fanfare. In fact, it would be more than 76 years before it was even officially recognized. First, nobody in the U.S. cared. Despite there being the American Soccer League at the time, not many Americans actually cared about soccer. Plus, news traveled very slowly back then. There were no U.S. journalists following the event, and any news that trickled back to the States about it was referred to as a U.S. tour of South America. And when Patenaude got home after the extended stay for the World Cup and several friendly matches that followed the competition, he didn't really talk about it much, or really at all. One of the problems with it taking so long to be recognized was an error in reporting by the British press covering the event, crediting the second goal to Tom Flory instead. There was another report giving Billy Gonçalves credit for the second one, and yet another that said it was an own goal by Paraguay. In today's context, that seems just unfathomable, right? But in 1930, players did not have numbers on their jerseys. So some good solid research needed to be done to settle the issue. In 1993, a year after the U.S. hosted the World Cup and the year that a groundswell of support for Major League Soccer was building, the official historian for the National Soccer Hall of Fame, Colin Jost, went to work. He had heard the stories of the original World Cup hat trick being scored by an American, but he hadn't read anything that would prove it. So he set out to prove it himself. He dove into Latin American newspaper accounts and found two significant accounts with descriptions, diagrams, and pictures. He presented his findings to FIFA, and on November 10, 2006, more than 76 years after the game, FIFA officially recognized that the first hat trick in World Cup history was scored by American Bert Patenaude. In 1990, the Minnesota Twins pulled off a feat that had never been done before and has not been equaled since. The Twins were in Boston taking on the Red Sox. In the bottom of the fourth, with the bases full of Sox, Tom Bernansky hit a ground ball to Gary Gaetti at third base. He touched third, threw to second to Al Newman for the second out, and over to Kent Hrbek at first for the triple play. Gaetti swears that prior to the play, he was talking with Wade Boggs on third and said, "Hey Wade, a 5-4-3 triple play is coming up right here." Boggs acknowledged the prediction, saying, "I guess that puts Gaetti right up there with Nostradamus, the amazing Kreskin, and Karnak the Magnificent." In the eighth inning, with men on first and second, Jody Reed hit another ball to Gaetti, and what actually looks like a replay of what happened back in the fourth, Gaetti stepped on the bag to force Boggs, threw to Newman at second, and then to Hrbek for their second triple play of the game. Despite the Twins' defensive gems, Boston won the game 1-0. A professor at Rhode Island College calculated the odds of turning two triple plays in the same game to be approximately 370,000 to 1. But you probably won't be around to see it happen because at those odds, it only happens every 175 years. Interesting fact, the next night, the Red Sox tied an American League record by hitting into 6 double plays, with the Twins hitting into 4 of their own, the two teams setting a new Major League record for double plays in a single game. And on this day in 1993, Scotsman Graeme Obree broke the world record for cycling's hour record. Many people have done that, and in fact, Obree bested his own record in '94, and then Italian Francesco Moser beat that later in '94. But what made Obree's effort on this day special was his showcase of unreal endurance on a bike that he had built out of scrap metal and a washing machine. First off, if you're not familiar with the hour record, it's simple in concept, difficult in execution. The event takes place on a velodrome track, typically indoors, and it's a true test of power and endurance. How far can a human ride in 1 hour? The famed Belgian cyclist Eddy Merckx brought a lot of attention to the hour record back in the 60s and 70s by riding a regular track bike, which is a fixed gear with no brakes. As technology advanced, methods to improve aerodynamics, bike build and material, and rider positioning brought hour record attempts into the space age. When Obree made his attempt, well, it would be attempts, and that's part of the specialness of this record-breaking effort. But when Obree made his attempt in '93, the record was 31.784 miles in an hour, and that was held by Moser. His first attempt at the record was actually on the 16th. He had brought the bike he built himself, and yeah, really, he took apart his washing machine and he used the bearings for his bottom bracket. However, the cycling company Specialized had jumped in to provide a little funding for the effort and supplied a carbon-framed bike of similar design and insisted he use it for his record-trying attempt. Against his protests, he made the attempt on the Specialized bike, and he came up short by 0.3 of a mile. Obree was disappointed. Now, understand the nature of this effort is to go as hard as you can for a full hour. There is no stopping, there's no slowing down, there's no resting. It is all you got for 60 minutes pushing a huge gear. It takes a lot out of a person. After he recovered enough to be able to talk, he told everybody present that he planned on making another attempt the following day. He'd rented the facility for 24 hours, and he was going to use all 24 hours to take another shot. And he was going to use the bike he'd built. He woke up at 2-hour intervals throughout the night to hydrate and stretch his legs. He showed up the following day, mounted the bike he called Old Faithful, and started his second attempt. For this attempt, he was using special bars that kept his arms in tight to be more aerodynamic. He called it the praying mantis position. When the clock hit 60 minutes, the Flying Scot had covered 32.06 miles for the new world hour record. Cycling's governing body, the UCI, would eventually outlaw the praying mantis position and his subsequent Superman position when he set the bar higher in '94, but that's a discussion for another day. The Flying Scot's performance on this day is one of the most remarkable in the history of human endurance and innovation. Okay, time now for today's non-sports Did You Know? Ever wonder how many satellites are actually orbiting the Earth? It's probably more than you think, and the number has gone up exponentially in the last 4 years or so. As of June 11th this year, there were 11,780 satellites above the Earth. That's all for today. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll have more tomorrow on This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.